Christmas, a time of joy, laughter, and warmth, filled with carols, gifts, and the glow of festive lights. But beneath the surface of cheerful holiday traditions, there lurks a much darker side of Christmas that most people prefer to ignore. Terrifying legends from around the world suggest that the holiday season might not be as peaceful as it seems. So, if you're brave enough, join us on a journey through these chilling tales. Before we begin, a word of caution. Once you step into this world, it might be impossible to escape the haunting shadows that hide behind the smiles and festive cheer. Are you ready? Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and wrap yourself tightly in your blanket. Let's dive in. Our first tale takes us to a place no one likes to think about during the holidays, a cemetery. According to legend, a mysterious dwarf, or perhaps a spirit, roams the graveyard, quietly tending to the graves and watching over wandering souls. Some say he resembles the garden gnomes you often see in front yards, though there's nothing charming or friendly about him. On Christmas Eve, while families feast and celebrate, the cemetery dwarf grows hungry. Isolated from the world of the living, he has no way to partake in the joyous meals that mark the holiday. And so, as dawn breaks, his hunger drives him to leave the cemetery in search of food. Legend has it that the tradition of leaving food out for Santa Claus on Christmas Eve may have a much darker origin. Families weren't only trying to please jolly old Saint Nick, but also to appease this sinister creature. In many cultures, the fear was that if the dwarf found no food left for him, his hunger would turn into rage. When angered, the dwarf could invade homes, steal valuables, or worse, cause harm to those inside. Some versions of the legend claim that if the dwarf's hunger grows too intense, he might even kill the residents as they sleep. His weapons of choice? Knives, scissors, or even his own sharp teeth, which are said to be capable of inflicting serious wounds. Yet, despite the terrifying possibilities, most believe that the dwarf simply wants to be fed. Families who remember to leave him something to eat can rest easy, knowing they've satisfied his hunger and avoided any ill fate. This story, while bizarre, offers a glimpse into how certain Christmas traditions might have started with something far more sinister in mind. Over time, the cemetery dwarf was either forgotten or absorbed into folklore. But for those who know the legend, leaving a small offering on Christmas Eve is more than just a gesture of goodwill, it's a matter of survival. The second legend takes place on a cold, foggy Christmas Eve. While most people are tucked away in the warmth of their homes, surrounded by twinkling lights and the scent of pine, one young man decided to venture out into the deserted streets. Perhaps he was restless, seeking fresh air after a long family dinner, or maybe he just wanted a brief escape from the festive atmosphere. Whatever the reason, the streets were eerily empty, and the silence weighed heavily on him. The fog wrapped itself around the dimly lit roads, and every footstep he took seemed to echo louder than it should. There was something unsettling about the quiet, something unnatural. At first, he thought it was just his imagination playing tricks on him, but as he quickened his pace, a distant sound reached his ears, the unmistakable roar of a motorcycle engine. It started faintly, but grew louder with each passing second. He stopped, his heart racing. There was no one else around, yet the sound was unmistakable. Someone was coming. When he looked down the street, two men on a black motorcycle appeared as if out of nowhere, cutting through the fog like phantoms. The headlights pierced the night, but their faces were mostly hidden, save for their eyes, cold, lifeless eyes that sent chills down his spine. The motorcycle slowed to a stop beside him, and in that moment, the air seemed to thicken with menace. The man on the back of the motorcycle dismounted with a deliberate, slow motion, while the driver remained seated, his cold gaze locked onto the young man. A subtle, wicked smile tugged at his lips, and the silence between them became unbearable. Then, the man who had dismounted spoke, his voice low and dragging, like a snake slithering through the air. "What are you doing out here alone?" he asked. The young man stammered, unsure of what to say, but before he could answer, the man's expression darkened. His smile vanished, replaced by something much more sinister. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice even quieter now, as if he were sharing a deadly secret. "Christmas Eve is for the living, not for those of us who ride the dark streets." Fear gripped the young man's chest, and he took a step back. But before he could react further, the man pulled something from his jacket, a glint of steel in the moonlight. With his heart pounding in his throat, the young man ran, the fog swallowing him as he sprinted into the night. He could hear the motorcycle revving behind him, its roar growing louder, but he didn't dare look back. The cold wind whipped at his face, and every step felt heavier than the last. Finally, after what felt like hours, he reached the safety of his home, slamming the door behind him. His chest heaved with each ragged breath, but when he peeked through the window, the street outside was empty. There were no men on a motorcycle, no roaring engine. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Legend says that those two men ride the streets every Christmas Eve, searching for those who wander alone. Some believe they are spirits, while others think they are demons who come to claim lost souls. Either way, it's said that if you hear the roar of a motorcycle on Christmas Eve, you should run because once they find you, there's no escaping their dark ride. The question hung in the air, deceptively casual. "Do you have something for us, friend?" Yet, beneath the words lay a menace that sent a shiver down the young man's spine. His mouth went dry, unable to form a response. The man standing before him took a step closer, his hand slipping into his pocket and pulling out a knife. The metal glinted ominously in the dim light of the street lamp. Dread washed over the young man as the blade caught the light, and he knew in that moment this wasn't just a robbery. From behind him, the other man, still seated on the motorcycle, let out a soft, cold laugh, a sound that cut through the heavy silence of the empty street. "Don't be afraid," the man with the knife said, his voice smooth but dripping with cruelty. "It's just a Christmas joke." He twirled the blade between his fingers, his gaze never leaving the young man's face. His smile widened, but it wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a grin of malice, pure evil radiating from his expression. Time seemed to stretch, freezing the young man in place. The knife was now inches from his skin, the motorbike engine growling softly in the background. He wanted to run, to scream, to do something, anything, but his legs refused to move. He was paralyzed by terror. Every fiber of his body screamed for action, yet he stood, helpless, unable even to breathe normally. The quiet street, so still and serene moments before, now felt like a cage. His fear was palpable, mocking him in the silence. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The man put the knife away, stepping back with a smirk. "Just a test," he said, voice low, as though he was merely checking how much fear he could extract from his victim. Without another word, he climbed back onto the motorcycle. The other man chuckled, louder this time, before revving the engine. And just like that, they were gone, the roar of the bike echoing in the cold night air as they disappeared into the fog. The young man remained frozen, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. He was alive, but his mind raced with questions. Why had they let him go? Was it a warning? A twisted game? Whatever the reason, from that night forward, the sound of a motorcycle in the dark filled him with dread. Next time, he feared, they might not just be toying with him. As unsettling as the encounter was, the night held even darker legends. In the hushed silence of Christmas Eve, while families gather around the warmth of the fire, exchanging gifts and enjoying festive cheer, there is a figure that roams the streets. It is not Santa Claus, nor any spirit of joy and goodwill. This creature is Krampus, the demon of Christmas, feared by children and whispered about in the darkest of stories. Krampus is not a figment of the imagination. According to ancient legends, he prowls the streets on Christmas Eve, his massive form cloaked in shadows. His body is covered in thick, black fur, and his glowing red eyes pierce the night. Twisting horns rise from his head, and his sharp, fanged grin betrays his evil intentions. But he is not here for the good children, the ones who wake to stockings filled with treats and presents under the tree. Krampus comes for those who have been bad, the ones who have lied, misbehaved, and disobeyed. The creature carries a large, empty sack, and it is said that this sack is reserved not for toys, but for the naughty children he plans to abduct. He stalks the night in silence, moving from house to house, sniffing out the scent of disobedient kids. No matter how well they are hidden, Krampus always finds them. He slips into homes through chimneys, cracked windows, or even seems to materialize out of thin air in the children's bedrooms. His victims never see him coming. Before they can scream or cry out, Krampus has stuffed them into his sack and whisked them away into the darkness. Where does he take them? Some say to his lair deep in the mountains, where they are punished in ways too horrible to imagine. Others believe the children are never seen again, their fates sealed in the eerie silence of Christmas night. On occasion, if one listens closely enough near the woods, faint screams are said to echo through the trees, cries of children who will never return. But while the night passes peacefully for most, Krampus continues his dark work, moving from one house to the next, ensuring no naughty child escapes his grasp. He won't stop until dawn, when every disobedient soul has been captured. So, as you lay in bed on Christmas Eve, with the house quiet and still, remember, if you hear strange noises, it might not be Santa Claus making his rounds. It could be Krampus, and his sack is far from empty. If Krampus weren't enough, there's another tale that lingers in the cold shadows of Christmas Eve, the legend of the hooded killer. In contrast to Krampus, who preys on the disobedient, the hooded killer strikes at random, his victims chosen by fate, not by behavior. It was on a Christmas Eve, much like any other, years ago, when a family, full of joy and contentment, prepared to go to bed. They had shared a delicious meal, exchanged gifts, and the children, with their new toys, were drifting off to sleep. The house was filled with warmth and laughter, and the thought of anything sinister happening seemed impossible. Yet, as the houses fell quiet and the family settled into their beds, the hooded killer struck. The intruder crept through the house, his face concealed beneath a dark hood. Moving with eerie silence, he took one life after another, leaving no survivors. By morning, the home was a scene of horror, the festive decorations standing in stark contrast to the violence that had occurred within its walls. The legend of the hooded killer spread far and wide after that fateful night, with each retelling growing more terrifying. Some say the killer returns every Christmas Eve, targeting a different family, always waiting for the moment when everyone feels safe, believing in the magic of the season. The clock struck midnight, and the family, unaware of the danger lurking outside, continued to laugh and chat, lost in the warmth of their Christmas Eve celebration. However, outside in the cold night, a figure dressed in a red hood, eerily similar to Santa Claus, walked silently through the streets. His face remained hidden in the shadows, but his eyes glinted with cold fury. He passed house after house, pausing just long enough to choose his next victim. He moved with the silence of death, a malevolent force under the festive facade. The legend of the hooded killer had begun to unfold once again. As the hooded killer approached the windows of yet another house, he watched through the frosty glass. Inside, the family had fallen into a deep, peaceful slumber, their earlier joy now a distant memory. The killer waited, biding his time until the moment was perfect. The youngest child stirred in his bed, waking to the sound of faint scratching at his window. At first, it was a soft noise, barely audible, but it grew louder. Curiosity overtook the child as he imagined it might be Santa Claus himself, arriving with gifts. He tiptoed out of bed and moved towards the window, his heart fluttering with excitement. As he drew the curtain back, his breath caught in his throat. Outside stood a figure dressed in a red suit, complete with a white beard and red hat, just like the stories had described. But something was terribly wrong. The figure's eyes were not filled with warmth or joy. They were cold and furious, burning with a malevolent fire. A cruel smile curled across the figure's face, twisting the image of Santa Claus into something nightmarish. Before the child could scream, the figure began forcing the window open. Panic surged through the boy's body, and he bolted out of the room, running to warn his parents. But by the time they rushed back into the room, the hooded killer had already gained entry. Chaos erupted as the killer attacked with brutal precision. The glint of his knife reflected the Christmas lights, creating a horrifying contrast between the festive atmosphere and the violence unfolding within the house. Screams echoed through the night, mingling with the eerie silence of the outside world. The family tried to defend themselves, but the killer was relentless, moving through them with a deadly purpose. One by one, they fell, and in the end, only the child who had first heard the scratching survived. He had hidden in a closet, his small body trembling as he listened to the heavy footsteps of the killer searching for him. Hours passed in agonizing silence, his heart racing as he waited for the inevitable. But the killer, having finished his massacre, left without finding the boy. When the child finally emerged from his hiding place, the house was soaked in blood, and the bodies of his family lay scattered like broken dolls. The legend says that after that night, the hooded killer disappeared, vanishing without a trace. He was never captured. Some say he is a vengeful spirit, doomed to wander the Christmas nights, taking lives to satisfy his eternal wrath. Others believe he still roams, moving from town to town, waiting for his next opportunity to strike. So, when you hear a strange noise at the window on Christmas Eve, think twice before investigating. It might not be Santa Claus, could be the hooded killer, waiting for his chance to enter. And if he does, there will be no survivors. Not all horrors of Christmas come in the form of vengeful spirits or human killers. In the high, frozen mountains, far from the warmth of human homes, a creature known as Gwa waits patiently for her time to descend. Gwa is a legend that not many speak of, for the terror she brings is so great that parents fear scaring their children with the truth. But as Christmas approaches, those who know of Gwa feel a growing dread, for Christmas Eve is her night of the hunt. Gwa is no ordinary monster. She is a gigantic, deformed being with wrinkled skin, her body twisted and grotesque. Her eyes glow in the dark like embers, and her long, sharp teeth are always ready to tear into flesh. All year long, she hides in her mountain cave, watching and waiting for Christmas Eve, when she finally emerges to hunt. But Gwa does not come for just anyone. She seeks out misbehaved children, those who have lied, disobeyed, or acted cruelly throughout the year. She knows exactly who they are. For her children, 12 sinister creatures spy on the towns below during the 12 nights leading up to Christmas. These dark figures sneak into homes unnoticed, observing families as they prepare for the holiday. They watch to see if the children are behaving, and if they find any signs of disobedience, they run back to tell Gua. On Christmas Eve, Gua descends from her cave. No one ever sees her approach, but some claim to smell her before she arrives, a foul stench of rotting flesh and mountain soil. Her gait is heavy, her steps slow, but once she finds the house she seeks, she moves with terrifying speed. Nothing can stop her. If a child is on her list, there is no escape. With sharp claws, Gua snatches the child and stuffs them into her large sack, the same sack her children spied on earlier in the month. She then returns to her cave, where a terrible fate awaits the child. It is said that Gua makes stew out of the children she captures, and in her cave, there is always a cauldron boiling, ready to cook her next victim. Those taken by Gua are never seen again, their screams lost in the howling wind of the mountains. Sometimes, if Gua is particularly hungry, she doesn't stop with just one child. She may invade the entire house, killing and devouring anyone who tries to protect the misbehaved child. Her 12 children join her, turning the night into a gruesome nightmare. Survivors of Gua's attacks speak of the terror they experienced, the darkness, the horrible smell, and the glowing eyes that haunted them as they tried to escape. They recall the deep, enormous footprints left in the snow, leading away from the homes of the victims, always back toward the mountains. So, if you have been naughty this year, or if you feel a strange presence in your home on Christmas Eve, be vigilant. Listen closely for heavy footsteps in the night. And if you hear a faint scratching at your window or the distant sound of something large moving outside, it may be Gua, and her sack is never empty. As the frigid winds of winter howl through the streets, it's easy to think of Christmas as a time of warmth, joy, and togetherness. But in many parts of the world, ancient legends tell a different story, one filled with dark, terrifying creatures who visit the unwary during the holiday season. While children dream of Santa Claus bringing gifts, these sinister figures lurk in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. One such figure is Gua, the monstrous creature who preys on misbehaved children, and her terrifying presence is just the beginning. On Christmas Eve, the monstrous Gua descends from the mountains. She is drawn to homes where children have been naughty throughout the year. Watching silently from her cold, dark cave, she knows exactly who has lied, disobeyed, or acted cruelly. When the time is right, Gua strikes, snatching the disobedient children from their beds and dragging them back to her lair. No one can stop her once she has you in her grasp. There is no escape. But Gua is not the only Christmas terror. While Gua preys on the disobedient, there is another terrifying figure that roams the snowy villages of Central Europe, particularly in Austria and Germany: Frau Perchta, the Christmas witch. Unlike the kindly Saint Nicholas, Frau Perchta brings punishment, not gifts. She is said to have a terrifying appearance, a pale, deformed face, an aquiline nose, and tattered clothes. But what makes her truly horrifying is the sharp sickle she carries on her back, ready to punish those who have not fulfilled their duties or kept the year's traditions. According to legend, Frau Perchta visits homes on the night of Epiphany Eve, January 6th. Silently, she moves through the house, slipping into the rooms of those who have been lazy or disobedient. While the family sleeps, she checks to see who has worked hard and who has shirked their responsibilities. If she finds someone who has been lazy or disobedient, she punishes them in the most gruesome way imaginable. With her sharp sickle, she slices open their belly, pulls out their organs, and stuffs their body with straw or stones, leaving them like a mutilated rag doll for the family to find the next morning. To appease her wrath, families leave small offerings of porridge or milk, hoping that Frau Perchta will pass them by, sparing them her terrible punishment. But the fear of the Christmas witch is not the only dread that haunts these cold, dark nights. In Iceland, the legend of the Yule cat, Jólakaturin, strikes fear into the hearts of children and adults alike. Unlike most Christmas tales involving cute kittens, this legend tells of a monstrous black cat that stalks the snowy nights in search of victims. The Yule cat is no ordinary feline. It is a giant creature with eyes that shine like lanterns and claws as sharp as blades. It prowls the mountains and valleys, searching for those who have not received new clothes before Christmas. In Iceland, it is customary for everyone to receive at least one new garment before Christmas. This tradition signifies that the person has worked hard throughout the year. However, those who have not worked diligently or have failed to receive new clothes become the target of the Yule cat. On Christmas night, the massive beast sneaks into homes where people have not donned their new garments. It moves with feline stealth, its black fur blending into the shadows as it approaches. And once it finds its victim, there is no escape. The Yule cat devours them mercilessly, leaving behind no trace except perhaps a torn piece of cloth. To avoid this grisly fate, families in Iceland ensure that every member receives a new piece of clothing before Christmas, especially children. The Yule cat cares not for who is good or bad. Its only concern is who has been diligent and who has been lazy. In a land where the winter nights are long and the shadows deep, the soft sound of padded paws on the snow is enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. In the Alsace region of France, another dark figure known as Hans Trapp stalks the Christmas season. The legend of Hans Trapp is one of a wealthy, greedy man who lived centuries ago. Unsatisfied with his riches, Hans Trapp turned to dark practices, making pacts with the devil in search of even more power and wealth. His sinful ways caught the attention of the church, and he was excommunicated for heresy. Stripped of his land and fortune, Hans Trapp fled to the forest, where he lived in isolation. However, Hans Trapp's hunger for power and wealth continued to grow. Over time, he developed a terrible craving for human flesh, especially the flesh of children. To lure his victims, he disguised himself as a scarecrow, covering his body with straw and rags. Patiently, he would wait in the fields for unsuspecting children to pass by. One day, he captured a child and brutally killed him, preparing to feast on his flesh. But before he could take his first bite, a divine lightning bolt struck him down, killing him instantly. Though Hans Trapp's life ended that day, his spirit did not rest. As punishment for his sins, he is said to wander the earth, especially during the Christmas season, in search of misbehaving children to capture and take back to the forest. Parents in Alsace warn their children to behave, for if they don't, Hans Trapp may appear in his scarecrow guise, ready to take them away forever. As frightening as Hans Trapp is, there is one more Christmas figure whose eerie presence chills even the bravest hearts. In the towns and villages of Wales, the legend of Mari Lwyd combines festive celebration with a haunting twist. Mari Lwyd is represented by a horse's skull adorned with colorful ribbons and ornaments. Beneath the white cloak that carries the skull is a person, hidden from view, guiding this spectral figure from house to house in the days leading up to New Year's. The tradition surrounding Mari Lwyd involves a form of verbal duel. As the figure of Mari Lwyd and her followers approach a house, they begin to sing challenges to the inhabitants, demanding to be let inside. The family must respond with clever rhymes and songs of their own, engaging in a verbal contest with the ghostly figure. If the household fails to outwit Mari Lwyd, she and her followers are allowed entry, bringing misfortune for the coming year. Though the tradition has a festive side, The image of a horse's skull knocking on doors, demanding entry, is enough to send chills down anyone's spine. According to deeper legends, Mari Lwyd is a lost soul, doomed to wander the lands at Christmas, seeking shelter she never finds. Some say that if you fail in the verbal duel, she may take something even more precious than your pride, your peace, or perhaps even your life. As you prepare for the holiday season, remember that not all Christmas tales are filled with joy and goodwill. Some are dark, terrifying stories of creatures and figures that lurk in the night, waiting for their chance to strike. If you want to learn more about these sinister legends and terrifying folklore, there's much more to discover. Click the card to explore further into the universe of macabre stories and creepy urban legends. Now it's your turn. Share these legends with your friends and see who can sleep soundly after learning about the darker side of Christmas. If you liked this, stay close, because many more terrifying stories await you here on the channel.